The part of the Noble Eightfold Path, which we haven't discussed yet, is the part of concentration, samadhi. The word samadhi is the word for concentration, and samatha is the word for tranquility meditation. That's the way we use them anyway, that's the way we translate them. And this part of the Noble Eightfold Path consists of three parts again: right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Exactly in that order. First comes the effort, then comes the mindfulness, and then comes the concentration. Right effort is a balancing act that each person has to do for him or herself. It is impossible to make hard and fast rules for different people who have different physical strength, different past experiences, a different mental strength, and different emotional strength. We can take it for granted that each of us could do just a little more. How much more is debatable. But what is quite sure is that if we make a certain effort, like we do here, for instance, with meditation and calm and insight, and if we just stretch that effort a tiny little bit more, it is like stretching one's muscles. They can then be stretched again, just a little more. We are, all of us, prone to give in too easily to bodily discomforts and to habitual thinking patterns, which are again and again challenged in the Buddha's teaching. And they are so often challenged in a way which we may not find very comfortable or very reassuring. And because of that, we like to come back to our old patterns instead of stretching the effort. I'm quite convinced that we could stretch it just a little more, every one of us. However, we must remember that it is not a matter of blaming oneself for anything that one hasn't done, and it's also not a matter of an achievement syndrome. Both of those create stress in the mind, which is counterproductive. Effort is an action in itself. That it will produce some results is in the nature of cause and effect, which pervades the universe. But if we only look for the effect, we will always neglect the cause. It's the same in meditation. If we're looking desperately for the effect, namely for the pleasant, delightful feeling or the tranquility, and don't look at the cause, namely the concentration, we're never going to get it. Our whole effort goes to the cause. Here, with right effort, it is the effort as such which we pay attention to. Whatever the results, that will be in the course of the progressive action we take. So it is essential that we look at effort as something which is worthwhile doing for itself. not for the results it yields. Achievement syndromes, the trying to get something for the effort, creates dukkha because it is wanting to get. It's a craving. It's wanting to get something. So obviously it will have dukkha as its result. The effort which is connected to I must do this now is connected very often to self-hate, and therefore also brings a strain to the mind, which again does not help us in any way. Sometimes people have headaches when they meditate. Well, obviously that's counterproductive. On the contrary, if we do have a headache, it should go away in the meditation and not come. This idea of I must do something is not the right way to approach it. We can use our willpower to make a determination and then try to stay with that determination which we have made, like a promise to ourselves. But it is only connected to our own ideas and our own actions. There's nobody that's forcing us or pushing us. There's nobody that is going to hit us or dislike us. It is a self-motivation. It's the only one that works, because self-motivation is also connected to self-discipline. And self-discipline is the hub around which practice revolves, because without it we would try and take it easy under all circumstances. Now, self-discipline does not necessarily only concern physical. It concerns very much our mental attitude, particularly in meditation. The discipline of the mind not to allow any kind of thinking, but to again and again bring it back to the meditation subject, to the concentrated state. This is an enormous discipline that we are imposing on the mind. And sometimes, if there is not only the achievement syndrome, but also the blame of not being able to do it, the mind refuses. Quite rightly so, because it is being put into an untenable situation. We're trying to make it do something which it isn't very proficient at yet, and at the same time, while it isn't proficient, we're also blaming. It's as if we were to blame a small child for not being able to walk very well yet. It just hasn't done it yet, so it wobbles around. And blaming the child isn't going to help it to walk very well, better than it did before. So if we put the mind into such an untenable situation, it refuses. It gives up and says, well, all right then, if I can't do anything, all right then. So we should be very protective of our mind. And there's nobody else that can protect it except we ourselves. We need to be alert to the pitfalls of negative thinking. Blame is a negative thinking. Resentment, also worry. Trying to get anywhere with the effort may be considered not to be negative, but it has greed in it, the craving aspect. So all of that is detrimental to the meditation as such. Effort for effort's sake, not for the result, because also there is a very interesting aspect to effort, that if one is trying to make just a little more effort than one has before, one gets a feeling of satisfaction. And that satisfaction in itself, if the effort is not considered to have to bring a result, but just as such as effort, that satisfaction enables us to make more effort. However, effort has another quality which has to go along with it, and that's steady. It has to be steady. And this is what I was saying about the 10-day courses earlier, that people do make quite a bit of effort in 10-day courses, and then the whole thing collapses again. It's much better to keep on plodding along, little by little, and not to stop at all, and not make such a concentrated effort if it leads to the complete giving up of effort. Otherwise, of course, concentrated effort for a short time is a desirable thing to do. But we need to watch our mind so that it doesn't get into what I sometimes like to call a short circuit. We're trying to concentrate, we're not able to, so we're blaming ourselves for not doing it, or doing it wrong, and trying to do something else. In the end, the mind just doesn't want to do anything anymore. It's as if a short circuit has arisen where all the fuses are being blown, and the mind just keeps on telling stories. At that time, the best thing to do is to relax and give the mind its way, just as if you had a little dog on the leash and it hasn't learned to follow yet at heel, and it's yelping and making a lot of noise because you're pulling it. Give it its due and just let the leash go for a moment. You might have to let the leash go for 10 minutes or more. It doesn't matter. The mind, when it objects to concentration, you've been, while making effort, putting in there also a negative aspect of the mind. Either blame, resentment, worry, fear, or even the greed of achieving. The remedy is always effort for effort's sake. Right effort is designated in its terminology as the four supreme efforts, which I think most of you or all of you have heard before. I'll just repeat them briefly. I think we have mentioned them here also. Not to let an unwholesome thought arise which has not yet arisen, not to let an unwholesome thought continue which has already arisen, to make a wholesome thought arise which has not yet arisen, to make a wholesome thought continue which has already arisen. In other words, not to allow the negativity, to stop them before they actually form, if the mindfulness is strong enough, and if they have formed, to substitute with the wholesome, with the positive. And if there is already wholesome thinking, to continue that, which very much goes back to the understanding that we gain through our labeling in the meditation, that we don't have to believe what the mind says. It's just very often, as we all know, idle chatter. We don't have to believe everything that goes on in the mind, particularly when it's negative. Now, this, the negativities in the mind, has a very interesting human aspect to that, which all of us have experienced and unfortunately will experience again. We are beset with the 3 roots of evil. We also have the 3 roots of good, but we have the 3 roots of evil. Delusion, which is its underlying cause from which hate and greed arise. Now, both of those, hate and greed, want outlets. And if there's nothing to be greedy about, if there's nothing that we would like to get, then at least we could find something that we'd like to resist. That's how our negativities arise in the mind, because we want an outlet. That's why we also sometimes, very foolishly, pick one particular person whom we dislike utterly. Nothing good about that person. That person is totally and utterly finished as far as we're concerned. So we can at least channel our outlet of hate. We don't have to spread it so much. We can channel it in one direction. It's probably more favorable to the rest of mankind if we do that, but we should recognize it for what it is. It doesn't have any basis in truthful or reality, or truthfulness or reality. It is an outlet for us, that's all. And somebody asked me just recently, I don't remember who it was, why people like horror movies. Well, that's the reason. That's exactly the reason. We can channel our negativities onto something which is happening on the screen. So we don't have to dislike our neighbor so much at that time. Of course, when we turn the screen off, who knows? It's very helpful to recognize it as such. When we recognize our negativities as such, they will be less important, they will have less of an impact on us, and we'll be more able to be protective of our mind state. Most of the time they do. However, we have mind states that do not necessarily have a subject. We can call them moods. Now, let's say you get into a negative mood, right? Depressive, angry, God knows what. It is very natural to now look for something that must have caused that. And usually it's a person nearest, physically nearest, because we don't have to look so far then. Or if somebody has just done something that we know about, then we pick that one. So we do not recognize usually the mind state as a mind state, but we are looking for the outside trigger. And the outside trigger may very well have been the cause, but it's not the underlying cause. It's only the external cause. It has nothing to do with what's really happening. The mind state is arising because it's in there. If it wasn't there, it wouldn't be able to arise. So once we have found the outside trigger, again we have a focus for that mind state. If somebody is depressed, they try to find out why and find something else outside of themselves, anger, whatever it is. But they could be, they are just mind states which very often don't even need an outside trigger. They can be triggered by the fact that we have habitually allowed them to arise. So habitually they keep on arising and keep on arising. And as they keep on arising, we may actually do another thing. we may continually blame a trigger which happened years ago and has absolutely nothing to do with the mindset which has arisen now. But because we need to find something which we could blame, we take this very old thing and keep on blaming all the negative mind states on that. Well, it's, you see, the Buddha said, the whole of the universe, O monks, lies in this mind and body. So once you know your own mind and body, it's obvious that everybody's mind and body is like that. And therefore the whole investigation centers around oneself. And then the result is that everything else becomes quite clear and open to one, to the mind that has seen the internal aspect. So when we have effort for effort's sake, none of these negativities will arise because we will be contented about the fact that we have made effort. And stretching the effort just a little further will be very also helpful for our contentment. Now, these supreme efforts, which are these four mental states, are called supreme because they are so supremely beneficial, and in the beginning of practice, people find them supremely difficult. But if that is a habitual effort, and that's what it should be, an habitual effort, it becomes actually simple. It's no longer anything that creates a great deal of determination, necessary determination. It just happens because oneself has seen the benefits of the positivity in the mind. The benefits are, of course, to oneself, but others also benefit. I have said this before, I'll repeat it, that our mental states affect our environment. It's a truism which we often forget because we think that our thoughts are private and secret. They're nothing of the kind. They're neither private nor secret. First of all, we don't own them. And of course, we think we own them, we can keep them locked up, but we can't. And that doesn't mean that other people have to be mind readers. Nothing of the sort. Maybe some people are, some might be. It doesn't have anything to do with it. It means that we are, through our mental states, emanating a certain kind of being. The mental states emanate from us. And as they emanate from us, we become aware of what we are pleased to call the vibes. Well, that's exactly what it is. It's a totally correct statement, even though it sounds New Age and somewhat crude. It is exactly what we're experiencing. So that emanation from us emanates from mind states. And it's very difficult to fool another person just by saying the right things. In fact, one would assume that it's impossible. But it isn't so. It is possible, but very rarely. Some people are very convincing in what they say. But most of us, ordinary people, the mind state which emanates from the being is far more convincing than anything else. And as we, with negativities, have, of course, negative emanations, we pollute our environment with them. And as we pollute our environment, which are, again, other mental states, the natural environment suffers from that. Because the negativities, which are either hate or greed, will necessarily induce us to do the wrong thing with our natural environment. People are becoming more and more aware of the pollution of the natural environment and that something has to be done. Well, maybe one day they'll also become aware of the pollution of their own internal environment. And if that happens, we'll have, of course, maybe a globe full of meditators. But it's too much to hope for, I'm sure. So, the right kind of effort. The word right is a masama that never changes from all the eight steps. Effort is vayama, sama vayama, right effort, is our mainspring. Without it, nothing happens at all. I mean, we wouldn't even be here. We wouldn't sit here. We wouldn't do anything. So it's our mainspring. Now, with that, we also have one other consideration, and that is right effort in which direction. And that is something that's very often difficult and confusing. I think we might be able to take a guideline from clear comprehension. The Buddha's explanation of mindfulness, not in this particular sutta, but in many others, is often co-joined with clear comprehension. Sati is mindfulness and sampajanya is clear comprehension. And clear comprehension has 4 points. And we might take our cue from those 4 points. We need to investigate whether, if we want to say or do something, particularly probably action but also speech, what is the purpose of it? What purpose do I have in mind? The second step to consider then is, in order to fulfill my purpose, which I have now looked at and consider to be worthwhile purpose, in order to fulfill it, is that what I have in mind to say or do the most skillful means? Or are there more skillful means available? Having ascertained that that's what I have in mind to say or do are the most skillful means, comes the third consideration. Is the purpose and are the means within the Dhamma, within the teaching of the Buddha? If I now am clear and sure that all 3 are positive, purpose is a good one, the means are skillful, and both are within the Dhamma, then we go ahead. And having either said or done what we had in mind, after finishing with it, we make a 4th investigation. Did I actually accomplish my purpose? And if not, why not? So it could either have been a lack of skillful means, it could have been an outer impediment which may have karmic causes which are unknown to oneself. It could have been a lack of Dhamma content, or it could have been a selfish purpose. There are many possibilities. But this kind of consideration within those 4 points may help us to realize where the right effort is applicable. Now, obviously, it's applicable for meditation, there's no question about it. Applicable for understanding the Dhamma, trying to remember the teaching. All those are, there's no question about these. But we have other efforts in our lives which are quite time-consuming and energy-consuming. So there we also need to investigate. because we cannot separate the Dhamma practice from our life. Eventually, our life has to be Dhamma, and Dhamma has to be our life. So there's no separation possible. It is this mind and body that is practicing, and it is this mind of which we only have that which is available to us, which is becoming enlightened. So no separation is possible. So to exercise this consideration, where the right effort needs to be mostly expended, is a very worthwhile thing. We are all limited in time, and we're all limited in energy. And those two are needed for the effort. We are not aware of the fact that we are constantly expending some energy and some effort, even in the most innocuous actions, such as getting up, getting dressed, eating, excreting, thinking. All of that is effort. And because all of it is effort, we have an option where to use our efforts to the greatest benefit for ourselves and others. These choices are important. And very often one comes to a certain crossroads in one's life. There are certain crossroads that we all come to where we have to make a new decision. One has been going along merrily doing the same thing for so many years, and then all of a sudden it doesn't look as if that is the right thing to do anymore. And then one has great conscience searching. Well, if we use these 4 criteria, we have help in that searching for the right effort. Right effort will always make good karma, and therefore we will have immediate results of a feeling of buoyancy and contentment. The feeling of having done the right thing brings that with it. If we use effort in a non-productive way, for instance, talking is effort and can be very tiring. And if it's non-productive talking, non-Dhamma talking, we will not feel satisfied and contented at the end. Vice versa, we will feel contented and satisfied having used the effort for Dhamma. We can check that out ourselves. It's very easy to notice. Most people even notice it without even being without it being drawn to their attention. Are there any questions on effort? All right, we'll go to the next one. We don't have to say a thing about the next one. It's called right mindfulness. We've been talking about that for over a week now, haven't we? And the one thing one might say about it is that it never fails to appear. In the Buddha's teaching, it turns up everywhere. The Buddha compared right mindfulness or mindfulness like salt in the curry. In other words, curry is tasteless without salt. Life without mindfulness is tasteless. If one doesn't have mindfulness, at least internally to oneself, one remains a spectator and not a participant. Because one isn't really with it. One's always standing at the edge. Mindfulness makes it possible to recognize one's participation in feeling and action, so that we have also the possibility, of course, of choice. Now the last one, right concentration, sama samadhi, never fails to be explained as the jhanas in all commentaries, in all suttas. It is quite amazing to imagine that anyone who is concerned with the Buddha's teachings and knows that the Noble Eightfold Path is a pivot around which practice revolves should ever think that sama samadhi, right concentration, has any other meaning. It's constantly repeated as such, as the jhanas. Concentration is one thing, but right concentration means the meditative absorption. There's no other way to explain. The Noble Eightfold Path is also the fourth truth, satya, and under such to be found in the Pali dictionaries. What now, O monks, is right concentration? If the disciple is detached from sensual objects, detached from unwholesome things, and enters into the first absorption, second absorption, third absorption, fourth absorption, and so forth. These are the 8 steps on the Noble Eightfold Path. I'll read you what it says about effort. What now, O monks, is right effort? If the disciple rouses his will to avoid the arising of evil, demeritorious things that have not yet arisen, if he arouses his will to overcome the evil, demeritorious things that have already arisen, if he arouses his will to produce meritorious things that have not yet arisen, if he arouses his will to maintain the meritorious things that have already arisen, and not to let them disappear, but to bring them to growth, to maturity, and to the full perfection of development, he thus makes efforts, stirs up his energy, exerts his mind, and strives. The word things is, of course, thoughts. I mean, what else is there to arouse? One can't arouse things. One would have to be a magician to arouse things. These are called the padanas. The padanas are the supreme efforts. So what I'm reading to you is the Buddhist dictionary, and it's not in the sutta itself. The sutta itself just says the Four Noble Truths, and you're supposed to know what the Four Noble Truths are, the Noble Eightfold Path. But in the Buddhist dictionary, these things are in that manner explained. The right concentration as the jhanas, in this case, the first four, I'll start talking about them a little, but there will be all these other suttas which are also concerned with them. The first four, 1, 2, 3, 4, called the rupa jhanas. The word rupa is body or corporality, matter, things, and the next four are called the arupa jhanas. Now often the Buddha only talks about the first four, because the next four are extensions of the fourth one. However, sometimes he only talks about the higher four, because the first four we've already dealt with in an earlier sutta. The first four are called Rupa Jhanas, fine material absorptions, we translate in English, because the states which are created through that concentration are states which are familiar to us in our ordinary way of life, except quantitatively and qualitatively much greater in the jhanas. Now the first one, as you all know, because I have often talked about it, is a physical sensation of great delight. It's very delightful, very often called rapture. It's a very delightful physical sensation. Now we have all experienced delightful physical sensations, with the difference that the delightful physical sensations which are available to us in ordinary life need an external condition. This one only needs an internal condition, namely concentration. And because of the difference between having to depend upon external conditions and internal conditions, we become independent of the world. And this is a sentence the Buddha uses over and over again when he talks about the meditative states. Now, obviously, we won't become independent of the world continuously until we have gained access to a different perspective about ourselves, some reducing of the ego consciousness. However, we are independent of the world while we're meditating. And that independence from outer conditions brings us, without fail, the understanding that outer conditions never contain the possibility of fulfilling our desires. The inner condition contains that possibility to a greater extent, but even not yet to its fullest, because it too is impermanent. And that's why I've been urging you, all of you, that when you do get to any of the states, and as they disappear, to make sure that you look at their impermanence. No matter how delightful, it disappears. Whatever has arisen must vanish. And as we see that vanishing, and have been able to practice continually with the right concentration, with the absorption, our mind will automatically veer to the conclusion that there must be something more, something that has no condition, neither inner nor outer, and therefore does not vanish again. Everything that has a condition must vanish, because the condition vanishes. What is the condition that vanishes? The concentration in this case. So because that too vanishes, even the most delightful state of meditation cannot be fully satisfying. Only satisfying to the extent while we're concentrated, however far more satisfying than having to rely on external conditions. At least we have some jurisdiction over the internal condition. We can at least learn to concentrate. We can make sufficient effort to concentrate well and do it every day. We have some control over this, over the concentration factors. Over the outer conditions, we have no control. We try to buy them with money. They are the least satisfying. We try to arouse them through thinking. They can't stay, they disappear very quickly. We try to arouse them through sense contact, over which we have very little control because it isn't always pleasant what we contact. And so our search for the pleasantness continues and takes up time and energy, whereas all we would have to do is go inside and find that what we try to buy out there free of charge. A great advantage when Sama Samadhi has arisen, right concentration. But it must be understood, and I will repeat this now, that again, we must know and we will know that we haven't come to the end of the quest. We have come to a very important stepping stone. Now the first four, as I said, called Rupa Jhanas, fine material absorptions, have their counterparts in our ordinary worldly experience. The first one with the delightful sensation, which we know in other forms, and the second one with joy, which arises out of the delightful sensation. Now the joy is something that we are familiar with. We're familiar with joy, caused by something which happens to us. Here, we don't have to wait for anything to happen to us. We make it happen. Much more satisfying, of course. Also, if we become proficient meditators, we make it last as long as we wish. Or goes by the name of contentment, which describes it better than many of its other names. And we know that too, but we are looking for it in many different places. Sometimes we look for it through other people who are just as discontented as we are. So when we find it within, we have found a jewel beyond price. It is the difference between the search which is in the world and is always connected with dissatisfaction, because the desire has to arise again and again because of sense contacts being so impermanent. And when desire arises, dukkha arises with it. Whereas here we are master of the situation when we become proficient at the state of concentration. Now the fourth jhana is a very peculiar state of mind. Even though it's called the fine material absorption, and therefore belongs to the Rupa Jhanas, it is a state of deep peace and utter equanimity, which has a depth where sounds no longer intrude. And we cannot rightly say that we know such a state in our ordinary living, because when we are asleep, we don't have the mindfulness to be aware of that peaceful state. So we actually have nothing to compare this with. And because we have nothing to compare it with, it's much harder to get at. The first three are, should I say child's play? Maybe not, huh? The fourth one is difficult. The fourth one has another inbred difficulty, namely the fact that in order to become that peaceful, so that there is a total absorption in itself, the mind absorbs in itself, the ego consciousness, which is still present in the first three, has to almost totally disappear. The first three have the ego consciousness through the observer. The observer knows, very pleasant. Observer knows what's going on. May not chatter like that, may not say very pleasant, but knows. In the fourth one, that knowing is reduced to its last minute point, so that the ego consciousness is also reduced to its last minute point. While it happens, believe me, it comes right back when the meditation is finished and says, gee, that was a nice meditation. Yeah, I can do that really well now, huh? So it's right back where we started from. However, we may gain an insight which is very, very important and tells us that the less ego consciousness we have, the more peacefulness we have. Because we've just experienced that. We don't have to believe anybody. We can say so from our own experience. And that is, of course, an incentive to work towards the reduction of ego consciousness till the point when it may actually disappear one day, because we have recognized that peacefulness. So the fourth one is a difficult step to take because of the fact that the ego consciousness is desperately set against it. It's trying all its might not to let us enter into it. By even when we already have the ability to go into it, we come right out of it again, because the ego consciousness would like to be present, and at that time it is hardly present, to the point where we don't notice that it's present. It is still there, but it is not hardly noticeable. And also, this is the one difficulty. The other difficulty is that we have no state of mind which is known to us to compare it. So we don't know exactly where we're going. Quite frequently, people compare it to being on the edge of a precipice and afraid to jump into the precipice. Quite true. A very good comparison. Because the precipice, we have no idea what it's like when we've jumped into it and into the valley. We don't know. And so it's a bit of a fear that arises. The fear is, of course, produced by the ego, that it's afraid it's going to be eliminated. You can reassure the ego that you have no such intention at this particular point in time, because you haven't really got to that point yet. Maybe that reassurance helps one to jump over the edge. The fourth one is made much of in the Buddhist descriptions, also in a manner of calling it the jump-off point for the four immaterial jhanas. Sometimes he doesn't even mention them separately, but quite often he does. We will talk about them at another time. They are also of great interest to us and of great importance, and they are the eighth step on the Noble Eightfold Path. And they are the way the Buddha practiced. It remains a source of wonder, of wonderment to me, why they have been in the past been hidden through silence. It doesn't mean that people haven't been doing them, because the mind naturally veers in that direction. A meditator's mind. A meditator's mind wants to go in that direction. It's a natural progression. There is no person that is thinking about such things who would not want to have peace. And where is peace? As I usually say, it's not on a piece of paper, it's in heart and mind. And naturally, the mind veers into that stream where it eventually can attain utter peacefulness. That's what everybody is looking for, basically. Even though we sometimes call it different things. We might call it happiness, we might call it joy, we might call it harmony, we might call it equanimity. It doesn't matter what we call it. We all can use with different words, but it is that inner peacefulness. It's also interesting to note that every mind takes the same steps. No matter how they are explained, no matter how they are written about, they are always the same steps. It is a natural progression for the mind. They can be considered our pathway to Nibbana. And if you look at them that way, you can't go wrong. Nibbana is a total change of consciousness. The jhanas prepare that change of consciousness. The depth and profundity of that complete change, where the perspective is no longer one of personal being, but one of universal being, is so great that we have to gently and gradually change our consciousness towards this goal. And that gradual change are the jhanas. They have been practiced in all religions, not just in Buddhism. They are called different things by different names. They are always recognizable by anyone who is doing them. They have certainly been practiced, and this may be of some interest, by the Christian mystics of the Middle Ages. Whether anyone in Christianity is now practicing them goes beyond my knowledge. I don't have that much contact, although I do have some, but not that much. But they are certainly, without any doubt whatsoever, written about by all the mystics whose writings are available, particularly of the Middle Ages. They're certainly practiced in Sufism, called something entirely different again. In Christianity also, of course, called entirely different things. Very often called prayer, different stages of prayer, all recognizable. Yes. Well, it's called different things, you see. In Christianity it's called contemplation. Using different triggers, coming to the same result, making totally different interpretations of them.
Perhaps people like Saint Teresa.
Yes.
Saint Francis.
Yes. Yes. John of the Cross.
Yeah, John of the Cross. Yes.
Francis de Osuna, who is very little known and who was probably the best exponent of it. So they have different triggers, not necessarily watching the breath, and they certainly interpret differently, but the result is exactly the same.
There was a Carmelite nun in Sri Lanka, if you visited. She was living there for a Western nun. She was living there for 20 years already, and we talked with her about meditative.
That wasn't in Sri Lanka. I visited Indonesia.
Ah.
Carmelite nun in Indonesia.
Yes?
Yes. She was Dutch. Yes. Yes, Dutch nun. Yes, I told you about it because she was Dutch. Yes. That's right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely the same thing. But called prayer. And different stages of prayer. So this, I'm talking about it for the reason of showing that the human mind has that as its capacity, and when interested in the interior life and in the spiritual emancipation, will go in that direction. It takes practice. It takes also some quiet surroundings as we have them here. However, when one becomes proficient at it, you can do it anywhere at all. It doesn't matter. Now the Buddha, there's a story by the Buddha, of a time when he was meditating by a river. He sat down under a tree by a river. And when he came out of meditation, there was a fellow standing in front of him who was as they call them, a wanderer of a different persuasion. In other words, most likely a Hindu monk, let's put it that way, or a Brahmin ascetic, right? And he had apparently been watching the Buddha meditating, and he said to the Buddha that he himself could meditate and had just recently done so during thunder and lightning, and had not lost his concentration. And the Buddha said, "Oh, very nice. But I've been sitting here at this river and been meditating, totally absorbed, and as I as I came out of the meditation, I realized that meanwhile 500 ox carts had gone through this river and had been churning up the dirt, and if you've ever heard an ox cart, which are only possible in the East, you know that the noise is deafening, absolutely deafening, because they've got wooden wheels and wooden spokes, and everything is wood, and they crunch against each other. And not only that, and the oxen bellow. So 500 of those ox carts, crunching and bellowing, went through that river while he was sitting at the edge of it, meditating. And so the other fellow was duly impressed, I presume. I don't remember what he said. But they were telling each other at the time that when you're really absorbed, the noise level does not matter anymore. So we have to take that into consideration when we watch our own meditation. Huh? So when there's real proficiency, a real mastery, the situation no longer matters. But while learning it, the situation does matter very much. It is very important to be in a protected environment where there is peacefulness and quiet and support system and all that sort of thing. It's a very important thing. But later, as the Buddha was totally master of it, of course, apparently no problem. So, in theory, one could do it in the middle of Martin Place. But I don't know anyone who does. I'll stop now with the jhanas, but is there any question on that? I want to read you the end of the sutta. I love that end. Is there any questions on what we've been discussing? Yes.
I'm being triggered in different Christianity. But are the triggers there still essentially concentration of mind?
That's the result. The trigger for the concentration, in our case, is supposed to watch the breath, or maybe the color kasinas, or loving kindness meditation. Whereas a Christian, even today, not just in the Middle Ages, would use prayer to Jesus or to one of the saints and try to become one with the Christ consciousness. This is their triggers.
Isn't that still, that is concentration?
Well, hopefully that would result from it, the concentration. They may be totally unconcentrated, who knows? I mean, I know people who watch the breath and are totally unconcentrated. Don't you? Don't we all? So they may be trying to become one with Christ consciousness and are totally unconcentrated. Well, if they become then concentrated, they then have the kind of experiences that we call the jhanas. They're exactly the same experiences. However, after they come out of them, they interpret them differently. Very easy. All you have to do is read the Christian mystics of the Middle Ages, and you'll see. I mean, Teresa de Avila or somebody like that. You see, they interpret it as having, Teresa, for instance, talks about having entered the chambers of, well, she has an anthropomorphic God, actually. And, Jesus? Yes, it was Jesus. Having entered into the presence of Jesus. He used Jesus. I mean, we wouldn't say that the second jhana is having entered into the presence of Jesus. I mean, I wouldn't dream of it. But that's her interpretation. But it actually comes to exactly the same experience, because she talks about the sweetness of it and the beauty of it, and she makes the descriptions which are far more poetic than any of the descriptions that I have ever given or ever will be able to give. The great poetry and well, she wouldn't like to say imagination because she's actually experiencing this, but a great deal of descriptive ability of beauty enters into it with her. Her as an example. Francis de Osuna isn't quite as elaborate in his explanations, but there's still, every jhana is a step nearer to God. So does that answer your question, or is there something else? Is that clear, what they're doing? Okay. It doesn't really matter. The main thing is you do it. But I think it is an interesting fact, and because we have plenty of time here, I thought I would mention it. I don't, always go into that kind of detail, but I find that an interesting fact, and it has been of great interest to me personally, because I didn't know that, before reading these things, that the mind doesn't matter where it comes from what the tradition or from which wish or desire, it goes along the same steps. In fact, Teresa de Avila talks about the mansion with the 7 chambers. Now, the mansion with the 7 chambers comes out of the Kabbalah, which is the Jewish mysticism tradition, which I also studied. Studied sounds a bit grandiose. Let's say try to study. It sounds a bit better. And she divides these up, these states of elevated consciousness, into 7 different ones, whereas we divide them up into 8 different ones. Sometimes they're divided up into 9 different ones, even in the Buddhist tradition. She says that 6 and 7 are very indistinguishable, which is not in this case. We don't find that indistinguishable, but we sometimes find 8 and 9 very indistinguishable. I mean, there's very little difference. The way she describes them is all one and the same thing. And I've actually taken this from her, using the description of the mansion with the 8 chambers. And I've said that many times because to me that was an excellent symbolism to explain how the mind can go into these different states. And she uses the chambers as coming nearer to the one where God resides. And God obviously resides in the 7th one as far as she's concerned. And 7 are used in the Kabbalah. And we use 8. That's minor distinctions. So I find this very, how shall I say, heartening, that no matter which way you go, you're always going to wind up the same place. And it also shows, I think, that a religious life can only be lived if one does allow the mind and trains the mind to go in that direction. Because this is where her religious experiences come from. This is where her religious teachings come from. Other than that, she was extremely practical and pragmatic and told her nuns to mop the floors and cook the meals and behave nicely. But her religious experiences all came from those states. And they are also described in other, as I said, in Sufism, which is the mystical part of Islam. You can find it there too. Again, totally different words, totally different aspects. How much of this is happening today is, of course, unknown. As you mentioned quite rightly, I did meet this nun in Indonesia. I made a point of going to see her, that particular nunnery, and this nun, I questioned her what she did all day. And she talked about her prayer stages, and she had 6, but she had only got as far as number 4. And she certainly looked like a jhana meditator. She was about 45 and she looked 25. And she'd been 20 years in the nunnery. But of course the word jhana or meditative absorption is totally unknown to them. It's just a different language. I find this very heartening and a feeling of togetherness and non-separation again. Very helpful in this non-separation aspect.
And I would assume really helped by your, delineating, or didn't you? Or
I wasn't trying to help her. I was trying to. Actually, I was sort of like questioning her to get some information, and she was very happy to express herself. They are a closed order. What do you call it? When they don't have contact with the world.
Yeah, that's right.
Closed it. And the Mother Superior, sent her to talk to us through a grill, and I don't think she needed my help for anything. She looked perfectly happy.
Did you talk about the Buddhist interpretation of those?
Well, I mentioned that we do the same thing, and that we have these different states, but of course that we do not consider that Jesus or God. But I went very tenderly on that, because no use to upset a cloistered nun, So I said, told her that we do that. She was very happy about that we do also something similar. But the Jesus and God idea and the Trinity is so ingrained that there's no way that would not be their pathway. Of course, naturally, what in the Buddhist tradition, the big difference is not that at all. That's totally the same. The big difference is that we don't stop at the 8th jhana, that this is our pathway to liberation. Whereas in Teresa's words, it is absolutely sure, there's no question in my mind, that all these, and the other, Francis de Osuna also, consider the presence of God in their concentration as the goal and not the pathway. For us, this is the path. And the Buddha was the reformer in that respect, because in his time, it wasn't called Hinduism, it was called Brahmanism. So the Brahminical religion, which was then in India in his time, also thought that the 8 jhanas was all there was, and that you became one with Atman when you came to the 8th one. But the Buddha changed all that and said, no, these are wonderful states, but you will still have dukkha when you come out. And if you still have dukkha, you still haven't done it. and I want to find the way out of all dukkha. And therefore he found that this is a pathway, but you must find the way to realize the corelessness, the substancelessness of all phenomena. Which of course this helps you to do, but it is a deliberate action of letting go this self-idea. And this is what he taught. That's where he was a reformer. And that reform, of course, as far as I understand, has not happened in Christianity. It is still exactly the same as it was. And but one which you should feel extremely happy about any of the nuns or monks in Christianity who are able to go along this pathway, because it takes them to a state of consciousness which is, elevated and transcendental.
So from your understanding and your reading and research, would you say that these contemplating Christians identify the presence of God as when the mind becomes concentrated?
Not initial concentration. When they have exactly the same steps for their concentration as we have. Not first, second, third, fourth jhana, but probably when you say in Teresa's case, maybe a seventh, eighth jhana. That's when they are interpreting as the presence of God, because they don't feel themselves anymore. See, as I've been telling you, in the fourth and the eighth, the observer, which is the ego, is practically gone.
That experience with God.
That's right. The presence of God, to be in the presence of God, because they've given themselves up to give that self up to be in that presence. But it isn't done through insight, it's done through concentration, and therefore the insight, the remaining step to be taken is not taken, that insight step, that you can actually give up the whole idea of self and give it up in a manner of complete surrender. Now they are surrendering, but during that time, and the Buddha is teaching to surrender completely. Now obviously some of them may have surrendered completely, who knows? I mean, I can't say.
Because, in my understanding, that the active kind of side of Christianity is trying to get to that, like abandon oneself in order to serve.
That's right. Yes, that is a way too. Not my will shall be done, but thy will. Now, but that doesn't work unless you do have those experiences. And it's quite possible, I would never like to negate the possibility that even without having any teaching in that direction, that when they have these experiences, whether then or now, and there is a giving up of the observer, that this surrender to the Godhead may become a permanent condition. It isn't taught that way. The Buddha teaches it explicitly, but who knows, they may do it. It's quite possible. And they may Grasshopper and I said, this is peaceful, so they may quite well do it, But the Buddha's words are explicit. And this is the only major religion where that is explicitly taught. The deliberate surrender, or deliberate it's not surrender in Buddhism, the deliberate understanding of the illusion, which needs then the giving up of that illusion.
When they say, I will to will thy will, that's almost the same thing, isn't it? I will to will thy will. That's almost complete surrender.
Yes, well, that is intellectual surrender. Yeah. Now you've got to do it. Yeah.
That's the statement. I will to will thy will.
Well, I don't know that statement from the Bible. In the Bible, the statement is not my will shall be done, but thy will.
Yes.
That's a biblical statement. I don't know where your statement comes from. So certainly, it's a determination. But whether you can then do it depends a great deal on the practice. And as you see, as I've mentioned, some of them do practice that way. But the explicit explanation exists only here of what one needs to do. Yes.
Is it explicit in the Buddhist teaching that if one experiences the states of the jhanas, to then incorporate them in everyday life, like joy, for instance, it is not dependent upon anything other than a self-rising state. It just rises out of oneself spontaneously. To try to cultivate that specific joy in everyday life that is independent of physical or outside stimulus.
It doesn't work quite that way. It works this way. The more insight there is, which means the more letting go of the self-delusion, of the ego concept, the more joyful the person is, because there's nobody sitting in there trying to make one unhappy. There's nothing happening. However, if it only concerns the jhanas, there's a residue of the jhanas. Although the jhanas may be done morning and evening, during the day there's a residue of them. The mind remains calmed and buoyant because it doesn't concern itself to the same extent with the worldly matters as it has done before, because it's found something much better to concern itself with. That doesn't mean that one remains in the jhana, which you couldn't deal with the world if you did.
No, I meant the counterpart of it that you explained earlier on.
The residue is there. The residue is there because the mind is now habituated in those directions. And also because the mind knows that it can revert to those states at will. Is that what you were asking, or something else?
Yeah, that's basically. I was thinking earlier on that to fully take advantage of this kind of, or any meditation, specifically what we're doing here, it would seem useful to be able to find one's specific nature, so that one could rest most of the waking hours in that specific nature that is minimum outlay of energy and conflict, in order to practice with the most peaceful, easy mind.
Well, are you assuming that every person has one particular specific nature?
Well, it seems that, it seems that everything in creation seems to have its own nature.
Okay, well, human beings are one specific creation. They all must have the same specific nature then. And the same specific nature for all human beings is that they're totally deluded.
Yeah. But that's maybe not their nature.
Yes, that is their nature.
Their nature, it's not their delusion.
Yes. The natural way of being is to be deluded. To get past that delusion is transcendental. Different karma is uniqueness, yes. But that again would not affect one's specific nature. Specific nature of human beings is delusion. True nature of human beings is nothing but phenomena. You can only rest in that through insight. As I told you a moment ago, the Buddha was the reformer. He said, that's very well to go through the 8 jhanas. But when you come out of them, you're going to have dukkha again. That's why it's not sufficient to have 8 jhanas, as the teachers in that time were trying to tell him. He went to 2 meditation teachers. They were trying to tell him, that's it, that's enough. Because in the Brahminical tradition, that was considered to be enough. And he said, no, when I come out, I'm having dukkha again. I want to get past all dukkha. Therefore, only insight will prevent a situation in the mind without dukkha. And insight means the complete letting go of the delusion, but not through intellectual understanding, but through the actual happening and the actual then resultant feeling. That's the only way that one's intrinsic nature of delusion gets changed into one's true nature of being just nothing but a phenomena. And then there's nothing to worry about. Nothing. Because there's nobody there to worry.
Which brings us back to that right effort.
Exactly. Exactly.
So my comment was just start with faith. Faith, I suppose. Before effort is faith.
Yes, the word faith is suspect, because it is very often, blind faith, and that's why it's suspect in English as in Western traditions, and we like to use confidence rather than the word faith. We get a bit of a connotation of, hey, do I have to believe something in order to get somewhere? It's confidence. So actually it starts with dukkha. This whole pathway starts with the understanding of one's own dukkha, and then with the faith which arises from hearing the true Dhamma, or the confidence which arises, and then comes a worldly joy of having the opportunity to do something about one's dukkha. And those three steps bring one to the meditative path. And that is the meditation then. So you're quite right, actually, but before that faith, which I like to, call confidence, the realization of dukkha. Because some people, they quite rightly say, they hear the Dhamma, and they say, oh, that's all very nice, but, I don't need it, I don't have any dukkha. Well, of course they do, but they don't know it, right? So we have to have enough understanding of our own dukkha in order to really see, aha, this is something.
Well, I was just seeking this a little bit more clarity on what Stephen was saying, and my own question about, I don't know whether it's in our tradition, Buddha nature, that's more Mahayana, isn't it, that expression?
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. I think Buddha, isn't that Zen? But we can use it.
Yeah,
we can use it.
True nature, Christ consciousness. Now, all those expressions, from a Theravadan point of view, would be referring to an experience of not selfness. And isn't this what you were trying to say? If one got to that level, then it would be easier to practice.
Yeah, that sort of has the feel about what I was feeling today. I just felt if I could find my true nature, I feel like it do this a lot easier.
Yes, but the true nature with the enlightenment nature.
I see.
Which needs right effort. And Buddha nature means enlightenment nature. You can't get away from it. There's only two ways. One is the relative reality in which we live, in which everything is deluded, and the absolute reality which comes from the letting go of that self-delusion. And that's called Buddha nature. Whether it is also comparable to Christ consciousness, I can't say. I don't know. I don't know the expression well enough to know. But it means Buddha nature, yes, of course, we all have it. So let's get going and find it. It's in there. It's just covered over with our inability to see it. That's all. So once you see it, then the practice of anything is of course easier, because there's nobody obstructing it. But at this point, there are always obstructions. Because me has thoughts about these matters.
What's the fourth jhana called, or described? How is it described?
Well, in the traditional way, it's usually described as equanimity. I like to describe it as a deep peacefulness. Because, equanimity is something that is, although it is absolutely present, it isn't as noticeable as a deep peacefulness. I mean, it's certainly present equanimity because they go hand in hand. Peacefulness and equanimity have to go hand in hand. But the peacefulness is more something that is more easily focused on. But it's orthodox title is equanimity. I'll just read you the end of this sutta so that we have finally actually finished with the Satipatthana Sutta. One shouldn't think it would take so long. Rising factors and vanishing factors. Now here also, the inside paragraph again is the same as everything else except the very end of it. Right, independent, that's the others? Also, no, that's the same as the others. That's exactly the same as the others. It's a bit funnily printed. They don't always print everything. Independent, not clinging to anything in the world. Yes. It's exactly the same. The conclusion. Because were anyone to develop these 4 foundations of mindfulness for 7 years, one of 2 fruits could be expected for him, either final knowledge here and now, or if there's a trace of clinging left, non-return. Well, final knowledge here and now means fully enlightened arahant, and the trace of clinging left of non-return is 1 step before full arahant, as called the non-returner, and his situation is compared to the scent that clings to a flower, the aroma that clings to a flower. That much of ego delusion still clings to them. And also, the Buddha explains that we have 10 fetters, and the non-returner has eliminated 5 of those. So you can see that even having taken such an enormous step as having experienced Nibbana 3 times and has become a non-returner, there are still half of the work still to be done to become enlightened. Non-returner, by the way, means non-return to the human level. A non-returner is a being that will be reborn in one of the Brahma states, which are the highest 4 consciousness levels, which are, as a vehicle, have the jhanas, and so that it is usually expected that such a person, even at death, can be in the jhanas, which one doesn't necessarily have to know about because one can't recognize it possibly. And in that state of non-returning to human world but being reborn in Brahma world, there does the last step of becoming arahant. The fact that only 5 fetters are eliminated is, of course, a sign how difficult it is to become fully enlightened, but not so difficult to enter into the stream, which is the next step of the stream entry. Anyone with determination, concentration in meditation, and a certain amount of already established purification should be able to enter into the stream, particularly if there's a great deal of confidence in the Buddha's teaching. And I think we have already discussed the 3 fetters that follow for the stream entry. Anybody remember? I think we have discussed the first 3 fetters. So there is a trace of fingers. Now, then the Buddha says, let alone 7 years. Were anyone to develop these 4 foundations for 6 years, let alone 6, for 5, for 4, for 3, for 2, for 1 year, for 7 months, for 6 months, for 5 months, for 4 months, for 3 months, for 2 months, for 1 month, for half a month, let alone half a month, were anyone to develop these 4 foundations of mindfulness for 7 days, 1 of 2 fruits could be expected for him. Either final knowledge here now, or if there's a trace of clinging left, non-return. Well, we've been here 8 days. What happened? Fair, isn't it? So what does he mean by developing these 4 foundations of mindfulness so that you become arahant or non-returner? He means that one is mindful all day long. And that is, of course, an enormous endeavor. And that's why we are enlightened. Okay, so the last paragraph. So it was in reference to this that it was said, because this path, namely the 4 foundations of mindfulness, is a path that he goes in one way only, to the purification of beings, to the surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, to the disappearance of pain and grief, to the attainment of the true way, to the realization of Nibbana. This is what the Blessed One said. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. What a pity, the end is not on the page. Never mind. I love this business of when the Buddha is supposed to have said 7 years, 6 years, 5 years, 4 years. I think it's great, isn't it? I've often mentioned this. So, you can see from this explanation of the mindfulness that we have an enormous gamut of experiences which can come to us. And it might be useful to have a sort of recap on that whole thing tomorrow, and just recap the highlights and sort of a consolidation of the points which are